Thank you for joining me on the inaugural Desteni TV Podcast. I'm Darryl Thomas, and in the background is the Darryl Thomas Orchestra playing the haunting Desteni Podcast theme. Today we're going to talk about the Greek crisis, today's edition, on the counterpunch.org website that's run by Alexander Cockburn and Jeffrey St. Clair. We have an article by Michael Hudson, who is the Chief Economic Advisor to the Reform Task Force Latvia and author of America's Protectionist Takeoff. Michael Hudson has an article called Greece Today, U.S. Tomorrow, the People versus the Bankers. And this is basically his theme for this article. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's very long, but it's well written, if exhaustive, in its treatment. That our economic policy basically is represented by a battle between the people and the bankers. And who saw that coming? He begins by saying, financial lobbyists here in the U.S. are using the Greek crisis as an object lesson to warn about the need to cut back on Social Security and Medicare. Mr. Hudson then goes on to relate the new economic policy, which has created a state of affair that neither Greece nor the EC are states or governments in the traditional political sense. The EU and the IMF bureaucracy is not elected, and at the point where their foreign-dictated financial plan succeeds, the economy's capital will be stripped and social democracy will collapse. Bank lobbyists know that the financial game is over. They are playing for the short run. The financial sector's aim is to take as much bailout money as it can and run, with large enough annual bonuses to lord it over the rest of society after the clean slate finally arrives. I mean, that's pretty obvious. You will see succeeding cycles of boom and bust, boom and bust. They know the game is about over and are just playing to run out the clock, basically. Now, he goes on to say that the EU is, quote, run by unelected financial officials who have inverted the historical meaning of democracy. Instead of the economy's most important sector, finance, being subject to electoral politics, central banks have been made independent of political checks and balances. Hudson goes on to relay the irony of how the post-Soviet countries who won their political freedom from Russia are now enslaved in debt by foreign bankers, which he calls, quote, an experiment in neoliberal central planning. Then he goes on to attack the American Tea Party, which very humorously does. America's Tea Partiers and anti-tax rebels have given up the fight to reform governments. Faced with the corruption of Congress by lobbyists acting on behalf of the vested interest, they reject government itself and seek safety in local gated communities. In commenting on the stock market soaring on the news of Europe's trillion-dollar bailout of Greece, he says, what really was bailed out is the principle that economics should be stripped so that finance capital may rule. Is this where Western civilization is supposed to be heading? Confronted by parliaments controlled by aristocracies, the 19th century reformers sought to take them over on behalf of democracy, but the vested interest fought back. Calling social democracy and public regulation the road to serfdom, they are trying to set Europe's economies on the road to debt peonage. I mean, that sounds better. Mr. Hudson's solution is to, quote, gain control of governments on behalf of the spirit of classical economic and progressive era reforms, end quote. We disagree. There must indeed be a clean slate and a takeover of governments by the people who will act on the principle of what is best for all. That is, the equal money system. That's what it's about, because the whole economic system must be transformed and changed. We're not going back to a classical economic system. That is what has brought us here in the first place. Under the equal money system, banks are not making money to enrich the elite. They will be acting solely as an apparatus to dispense funds to all equally. Now, I appreciate Mr. Hudson's take on the current situation. He's deconstructed it brilliantly and has actually been able to see how the deception and abuse is played out in historical terms. I suggest we start the process of beginning to take back our governments and institute a society where equality is actually taken seriously to the point of actually establishing it on economic terms, on the principle of what's best for all. Thank you for joining me on the inaugural Desteni TV Podcast. I'm Darryl Thomas. We will see you next time.